Hello, Amsterdam. I feel like we are at the beginning of a new world, and I would really rather be with you in Amsterdam today. Because the only thing that's kept us going is fantasies right now. And despite however good the technology is and the amazing job that my Phocuswright colleagues have done to move, Phocuswright Europe online, there's nothing like being in Amsterdam. And because how do you capture the spirit of a city on a screen, right? The walks by the canals, the dodging of the bikes, they're trying to hit you when you cross the road. So there's nothing like being there. But for now, this is all we've got. And we're going to make it a good one today, with our stories from Asia, because we've proven that we are adaptable, that we are resourceful, and we are absolutely determined to build back travel. And so for the next hour, as Pete says, we're going to go on a journey across Asia. We're going to share stories of survival and creativity and what are the opportunities in the new beginning. So without further ado, please say hello to my first panel, friends calling in from different corners of Asia. Please welcome Mieke De Schepper, Executive Vice President, Online Travel and Managing Director, APAC for Amadeus. We have Timothy Hughes, Vice President, Corporate Development of Agoda. We have Jun Shin, Chief Strategy Officer of TIDESQUARE, and we have Christine Wang, Head of Business Development Asia, Lufthansa Innovation Hub. Hello, friends. How are you?
Hello.
Good. Everybody's calling in from different corners of the world. Fantastic. So I'm going to try and break this discussion into themes, right? And so the first theme is we got to start with the good news, right? And the only good news right now, unfortunately, is coming out of China. And so let's start with China because, the reports coming in say that basically by Chinese New Year next year, airlines in China would have totally recovered, in load factors, but perhaps not yields. So let's start with Mieke and let's start with what trends you're seeing there and what lessons can we learn from the China recovery.
Yeah, I think China is an example we all like looking at because they really went first in and they're first out. They're all back to traveling. The summer holiday was a massive boost of all domestic travel. And by a survey done by Trip.com, that's 80% of the people want to travel again. And it's really all domestic travel at the moment. What you do see is that it's slightly different traveler profile than before. So more younger people traveling, more, as we call it, kind of leisure travel, independent leisure travel, and of course, all domestic. And people are going more short distance and more luxury. And so not so much group anymore. Well, before you had a lot of group travel, and now it is much more individual travel. What we also see really is that in China, you can really see ahead of it in terms of adoption of new technologies. So touchless technologies in the hotels. I mean, China has really been accelerating in that. Temperature scanning with AI being used at airports. So they're really taking a leapfrog in terms of technology advancements. So it is super interesting to look at China and how they're really getting out of this on a strong note.
Right. So let's go to you, Christina. You were based in Shanghai prior to Singapore, and I hear that you're now in Berlin. So you're the only one who's been going places. So you're in Berlin. Christine, tell us about the themes of recovery you're seeing in China. And do you think that the trends that we're seeing now, what Mieke talked about, which was like more luxury, shorter trips, will that translate to outbound travel when the Chinese can travel again?
Yeah, thank you, Hoon. I'd like to highlight two trends we see. One is that China is actually really going back to pre-pandemic levels. We see this on the flight capacity level being now at 90% on the domestic side. We see pent-up demand for Golden Week holidays, albeit, of course, domestic. So really looking at the nature travels, people are still very much interested. I think what's really interesting now that everything is going back, Disneyland Shanghai is open again. What we do see is that future of work, which is a really big topic for us right now, and thinking about how business travel is actually going to change. We do see that in China, it actually went back. So people are back in the offices rather than, like a Google, for example, and working remote until probably next year. So I think that's one interesting trend, which is very different from perhaps the conversations we have here in Europe. I think the second one, building on Miike's points, digital acceleration is definitely something we see. It's unlocking new customer segments. For example, the elderly generation now going on online platforms to buy their groceries, for example. We also do see that in how travel companies are responding to it. So live streaming, selling of hotel packages, something really strong that Trip.com has been following, and expanding actually into other parts of Southeast Asia now. So I think that's very exciting. And we do see that is very much the recovery coming out of China.
Okay, that's really good news. So I'm going to go to Tim, and we're going to now talk about, the China story right now is domestic, but, there are clear lessons to be learned, like business travel. People are traveling again for business, smaller groups. So let's talk about domestic tourism, because even in tiny Singapore, where I live, the government is spending $45 million on a marketing campaign and basically giving away $320 million in tourism credits to people like us to go to the zoo or to go to Sentosa. So Tim, with a business like Agoda, which is absolutely dependent on cross-border travel in Asia, how are you adapting to a domestic world?
Well, it's a good question, Sue. The good news, and I hate to use the word good news ever, but the good news is that this is not our first run at domestic. So we have had a solid domestic business, and we can point to markets through North Asia and Southeast Asia where we have, as well as the cross-border stuff, been pretty solid in domestic. And it's also not our first crisis. Now, I'm not saying this crisis can mirror SARS or volcanoes or tsunamis at all, but the patterns, because this one's bigger than anything, but the patterns we were kind of prepared for. We had a feeling, and it proved to be true, that the following things would happen in these early stage recoveries in domestic markets. One is this matches of what Mieke said, lead times shortened dramatically, right? So we having a sense for that, we already spent time with hotel partners getting ready for rates available on a Friday for booking on Friday. We knew the flexibility became critical. So again, we worked with partners saying, guys, you've got to have, the non-refundable is gone temporarily. You've got to just turn off non-refundables and accept the fact that free cancellation is critical. And we also knew the consumers wanted, again, the biggest point, they wanted luxury, that when they did get a chance to get out, they wanted a deal, but they needed a break. They needed something beautiful. They needed a vista. They needed a forest. They needed a mountain. They needed a beach. And so we scrambled. We shut down every other product we were working on technologically and scrambled to build short lead time, domestic, easy cancellation, deal-driven business, both from a product perspective and also from a dealing with our hoteliers perspective. And then, as you say, we had to work with governments. And we've done lots of work, particularly in the most recent term with the Japanese government and the Thai government on their programs, and help do that. It involved shifting a lot of the business to this. Now, there's good points to that. And, there are cities in Thailand, there are cities in Taiwan, and cities in other markets that are doing really well. But that domestic travel doesn't help everybody. It doesn't help, and I don't know how to help, quite frankly, the MICE hotels in downtown Bangkok and downtown Tokyo and downtown Singapore. And I'm not sure how to help those that were dependent destinations like Koh Samui, dependent on inbound. But it does see a little bit of hope and a little bit of business coming to those destinations that were popular with domestic travelers.
Yeah, I guess we just have to kind of really now just pick up the pieces where we can, and try and work on those, and grab those opportunities, right? In Singapore, this week they announced that they would allow exhibitions, conferences for up to 250 people. So you can start from October 1. So I think governments are really, they know that their economies are going to absolutely implode if they don't open. So I think I definitely feel there's a sense of urgency now within governments in Asia. Do you feel that?
Yes, and the super good news, again, it's hard to use the word good news, but good is a comparative term. The good news is whenever a market changes its restrictions, we saw the domestic demand come back immediately, like that afternoon.
It's just like switching on a tap.
Switching on a tap. The consumers didn't sit there in their houses nervous for 2 weeks. In fact, they just leapt forward and said, I've got to go. But equally, when a problem occurred, the travel turned off immediately. And Vietnam was an example of that. We had an outbreak in Vietnam and the business went from fantastic to terrible, and leading into, I know we've got Jun on the panel, he'll talk more about Korea, but Korea was also an example of that, of a market that was doing really well domestically, but had an outbreak and turned on. So the good news is it turns on really quickly. The bad news is it's equally as fragile. It can turn off very quickly.
Right. All right, so Jun, let's go to you, because you had the experience of turning it on and then turning it off. And so, Korea has had a few stumbles. What's the current situation like? There's still domestic tourism, but clearly not as good as a few months ago.
In Korea, we have managed to control the spread of virus quite effectively, but obviously with some hiccups. Most recently, we have suddenly have seen a lot of confirmed cases, and the government again raised the social distancing restrictions. So as Tim just mentioned, the travel demand is very sensitive to this kind of news on the media. So it's turn on, turn off very quickly. So I guess, but with this tightened guideline, I think we have the spread looks like is contained, but government will still keep this guideline in place. So we'll see when government lower the guideline, then travel demand resume.
Yeah, it seems to me like for the rest of the year, in Asia, I think it's all going to be domestic. I'm not confident that borders are actually going to be opening for cross-border travel this year. So I think we all just have to figure out how to work in a domestic world. And so if we talk about the shift to this domestic world, Mieke, what's the impact on a GDS like yours? Because, you are absolutely dependent on cross-border, travel, right? So how is it impacting a GDS like Amadeus?
Now, of course, it impacts us, but it's also a bit like what Tim was saying. We also have a domestic business still. And in quite a few of the Asian markets, there's quite sizable domestic businesses that we support. And we don't only support on the distribution side, of course, it's a big part of our business, but we also support airlines and travel agencies with IT. We support airports. And what's very interesting, for example, at the moment, airports, they actually can do some technology changes at the moment that normally when they're at full capacity, they're unable to do. So we're really seeing quite a bit of interest in other areas where people are taking advantage of kind of this low volume to be able to make some tech changes, platform changes that are super hard to do when you're running at full speed. Because normally travel goes, and especially online travel goes on 24/7. It is very hard to unplug some stuff and get some new things in. And so we're really seeing some on the airline side, airport agencies really making those changes. We're also really helping hotels through seeing like how are they going to manage the change, how they change their rate plans, their structures, how they reach the new type of consumers, because most of them don't have experience with reaching domestic consumers. So how they adapt their media strategies. So again, there's still a lot of business and opportunities that we have to help our customers. Yeah, and it is changing the conversations. But I think we're providing technology for travel, and distribution is a part of that. But I think we can also support many of the travel providers at this stage.
I guess the positive that comes out of it is that domestic was a market that none of us, in markets like whether it's Malaysia or Thailand or Philippines or Indonesia, that we never really nurtured, right, and marketed to. And so out of this, maybe the positive is that we will have such strong domestic industries and infrastructure so that when international travel comes back, we are stronger as a whole. Now, I know you're not fortune tellers, but I'm going to put you on the spot here. Can you each predict a moment, do you think, when international borders or regional borders might open in Asia? The first international border to open in Asia. Timothy, I'm going to go to you. Give me a date.
Well, look, it comes down to one word and one word only, and that's a vaccine. I think anything else is going to be minor and not at scale. I used to be excited about the words corridors and green lanes and whatever else, but those have just proven really difficult to negotiate, and it looks like they're just not at scale. So we may get an opening. Maybe you can start to cross the Malaysian-Singaporean border. That seems the most obvious in Asia. that would allow some sort of crossing. But I think, at scale, true international travel in Southeast Asia needs a vaccine.
All right, so the date is a vaccine. Let's not talk anymore. Okay, so now let's go to the trend of Zoom. Okay, hello Zoom, goodbye some parts of corporate travel and MICE, right? And you can see this conference is completely online. Do you feel, Christine, I'm going to go to you. Is this a part of travel that will be permanently changed? Corporate travel and the events business? Christine?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And we're currently doing more substantial research on the new business traveler. I do think that at the end of the day, it's a time period question, right? Like it really depends on the vaccine, etc. I think a main difference probably between Europe and Asia is definitely the conversation around sustainability. And so a lot of corporates in Europe are rethinking whether business traveling is relevant and useful. I think in Asia, we do see these type of conversations as well. Maybe from another motivational standpoint where it's a lot of effort to actually travel between the Asian countries because you don't have Schengen, you don't have EU countries. At the same time, we do see that there are some persisting business use cases, so to speak. So for example, production site visits are really hard to replicate on Zoom, right? But at the same time, we do also see that some business use cases are getting reduced. For example, internal meetings, trainings, all these different things that are more standardized or have already had a level of trust between the two parties talking on Zoom.
Okay, Tim, what's your opinion on this?
Christine's absolutely nailed the answer. Business travel as a whole cannot live on Zoom. Right, the things that we get done in travel on business cannot live on Zoom as a whole, but parts of it can, and the internal QBR, just to Christine's point, the internal brand review, those things may be permanently altered. But I just know in my own experiences, I'm getting less stuff done because I can't go to see people. So that some of it has to come back, but it's going to be really hard. I mean, it's going to be vaccine plus to get that stuff going, because the plus is corporates willing to start to write checks again, right? Because there's a cost, right? There's an enormous cost in travel, enormous cost in MICE. So we need the vaccine plus corporations being prepared to write checks. But I'm a believer for sure in the longevity of business travel, but maybe not necessarily all of it forever.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, there's so much frustration right now, like even having this panel, right? I mean, we are trying to have a discussion, but it's so frustrating to like, I want to touch, so I shouldn't say that, but I want to reach out, and it's so frustrating that I feel that when we can, it's going to absolutely come back with a vengeance, and Mieke, I mean, we always say in Asia, the face-to-face is even more important. So maybe we can go to Mieke, and what are your comments around corporate travel? And especially, it is such a big chunk of the business for GDS, for airlines, for hotels.
Yeah, no, and I think it will change. And I think, and just also again from a personal perspective, and then I used to be in the plane 60 to 70% of the time, all around the world. And I've spoken to quite a few of my fellow, plane livers, and they're all saying never again like that. Yeah, and so. That's the high frequent travelers. And so I do think it will change. And again, I do think people in the industry, everybody's been heavily affected, especially in the airline industry, but of course also hotels. And I think we have to be flexible and adapt. And that needs to be your mantra on how can I adapt to where the demand is, where the interests are. And passengers are looking for new things. So passengers are looking for hygiene, for safety, for having confidence with that they can cancel and change their ticket. So how do you adapt your offering to that as an airline, as a travel agency? And we really see, I think, the ones that have that flexibility. I mean, there are some airlines that are not doing that badly at the moment. In Asia, they're doing cargo, and they've actually been booking better results than they had for a while. You see some travel agency really pivoting. So it's interesting.
Actually, June, the only two airlines to show a profit last quarter were in Korea, Asiana and Korean Airlines, June.
Yeah.
So, they were the only two airlines to show a profit. So, Jun, I mean, you used to work with McKinsey. What are some of the reports that McKinsey have put out that will, that cover, the way travel will change, corporations, how corporations are going to view travel?
Mm-hmm. I think definitely, the demand will be much lower, given most of the people get used to online meetings and all those. But there are areas, the online meeting cannot replicate. For example, like going to, for construction company, going to construction site cannot be, replaced by online meeting. So we have a lot of customers who are building, dams and, the buildings all around the world. They're the first probably really want to go out, go on a corporate travel. And I think, slowly corporate travel will recover, but not immediately, probably this year and next year.
Okay, so we all kind of have to try to survive till the sun rises again, maybe next year. Okay, so Tim, the fourth theme is travel corridors. Tim, have you guys all totally given up on travel corridors and green bubbles and all that stuff that we were floating about? What's really needed for it to happen?
In one respect, if you think about what we got to do, what we can do right now is get through 2020. And 2020 is a domestic year. We're done. That's it. That's for sure. And betting any business in 2020 on opening up corridors is dangerous, because then you take your eye off getting the best you can out of what is domestically available. So then we think about, next year. But then you think, what is a corridor? A corridor is like a trade deal negotiated before there was the WTO. And it gets really complicated because you need the trade minister, the transport minister, the health minister, all coming together from two different countries to figure out a way. I'm going to just take a simple question. Let's say Thailand and Korea struck a deal for a trade corridor. Does that include Australians living in Thailand? Or is it just Thais living in Thailand? Like, you've even got to just decide who does it cover, even becomes a complex question. How many days of quarantine? What are the tests required? What's the tracing capabilities for it? What do you do if someone has an outbreak? What insurance do they need? How does healthcare work? It's just incredibly complicated. Now, I hope someone figures it out. I hope they crack the code. But in the short to medium term, we've just got to focus on the business that's in front of us, which is, domestic.
Okay, so don't hold your breath. Just get through 2020 domestic. So therefore, what should they be doing now?
Soon we have a question from the audience.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So since we're talking about how travel is changing due to COVID, we have a question from Aurelie Krau. She wants to know that in order to support business travel and sustainability, do you see a trend for longer trips? For example, combine several meetings into one, or work from a remote location when you are gone for the meetings? And do you see this push coming from corporates?
Let's refer the question to Christine. Christine?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a good question. I don't have a good answer on that. I think as of now, because international flights are still very subdued, we don't really see any of that type of behavior really being displayed. But of course, I think there are conversations in corporates now to think about how to reduce traveling, and that is because it's such a hassle right now to travel. I mean, I just got in from Singapore. If I go back, I have to quarantine 14 days. I'm not even 100% sure of the whole process, right? So it's a lot of hassle for people actually to travel for business. So they better think twice on, do they really need to travel, for which meetings, and is it worth it? So that would be my answer.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, with all these companies, companies with resources, Agoda, Amadeus, TIDESQUARE, and Lufthansa, you're all established giants. How do the startups get through this? How do the startups, survive in a domestic-only world for the rest of the year? Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take it. I think it's really all about flexibility and versatility, being able to pivot and be quick. And I would say typically startups are much better at these things than the bigger corporates. And I think there's already some great ideas. I know that they've been working with cameras, making that into temperature screening. There's some really interesting ideas out there. So I think typically a crisis like this really stimulates innovation. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing some great ideas out there of new thinking.
Okay. Christine, I mean, you've been following the startup scene, doing a lot of surveys around startups. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, we also believe that a crisis is always a chance for new disruptions, opportunities, innovation. So definitely also in this pandemic. For the travel startups that are already out there, definitely a very hard and tough times, like for anyone in the travel sector. But we also do see positivity coming out and resilience, especially from the travel startups. So startups in the sector, they've been really quick in pivoting. So really either in terms of their customer segments or their product features or their business model. So we've seen that. Of course, I think the biggest challenge for a lot of these startups is the conservativeness now of the VC community. So big established startups within the travel sector do have funding, but of course it becomes even more important to really manage your cash burn as a startup in these times.
Okay, so basically survive 2020, but get ready, for the new trends that are showing us the path to the future, the traveler trends. And when it comes on, it will come on quick. So let's just be ready for it. So now let's wrap up this session with rapid fire. So Tim, you adopted 2 soy dogs. One thing your 2 soy dogs which you adopted have taught you during this period.
The incredibly recuperative power of the word walkies. Everybody smiles. The word walkies comes up. I smile, they smile. All the stress goes away.
I'm smiling. Mieke, one thing being grounded has taught you.
I would say carpe diem. Really just be in the moment. I used to be a big planner. Now I am, and I try to be there, what I can control at that moment and what I can enjoy at that moment.
Okay. Christine, you are a classical violinist. So what does playing violin teach you about this moment?
To using other parts of my brain and be more creative and finding solutions out of this pandemic, definitely.
Okay, Jun, Singapore is trying to start a travel corridor with Seoul. Would you travel to Singapore for WiT this month with the new travel corridor?
Definitely.
Wow. Okay, thanks. Okay, either or. Tim, Singapore Airlines or Scoot?
Just get me on a plane. I don't care. But if you get champagne in the lounge, maybe that would sway me. But I just want to get on a plane. I want to go anywhere.
Okay, Mieke, private villa or hotel?
Private villa. Before pandemic, post-pandemic, I would say always.
Okay. Jun, road trip a car or a camper van?
Oh, car. It's much easier.
Okay, Christine, beach or mountain?
This weekend, definitely the Alps.
The Alps, of course, because you're in Berlin. Well, stay in Europe.
Exactly.
At least you can travel in Europe. You have much more freedom in Europe right now, so stay in Europe. Yeah. Thank you so much to my panelists, Timothy, Mieke, Jun, and Christine for this amazing session of Focus of Recovery from Asia. Thank you so much. Hope to see you in the flesh soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.